Part 5, Section 1, Chapter 5 of Short History of the Christian Church by John Fletcher Hurst. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 5, Maryland, Pennsylvania, and Other English Colonies. The colony of Maryland was the only English colony of the Roman Catholic Church. Sir Charles Calvert, Lord Baltimore, had been a Protestant, but became a Roman Catholic. England was therefore no place for him. He, with a company of the same communion, secured a charter for the founding of a colony in Maryland. In order to carry out his plan, he had the shrewdness to see that a colony of Roman Catholics alone would not be tolerated. The first Lord Baltimore died before his charter received the royal seal, but the pledges were made good to his son Cecil, the second Lord Baltimore. Freedom was granted to all Christian faiths. The first Maryland law was, "No person within this province, professing to believe in Jesus Christ, shall be in any ways troubled, molested, or discountenanced for his or her religion, or in the free exercise thereof." This was the first declaration of perfect religious liberty in the New World. Unitarians, however, were excluded. The colonists, about 200 in number, arrived in 1634. The colony was called Maryland, after Henrietta Maria, the wife of Charles I. The first stage in its history was prosperous. The Legislative Assembly was composed of all the free men of the colony. People of different religious beliefs dwelt peaceably together. While the Catholics were at the outset in the majority, the Protestants increased so rapidly that they soon gained the upper hand. By the end of the century the Protestants had control. In 1654 the Assembly deprived Catholics of their civil rights, and further decreed that liberty of conscience should not extend to "popery, prelacy, or licentiousness." On this Bancroft makes the remark, "The Puritans had neither the gratitude to respect the rights of the government by which they had been received and fostered, nor magnanimity to continue the toleration to which alone they were indebted for their residence in the colony." In 1688, when the deputies of Baltimore delayed in proclaiming the new government of William and Mary, the Protestants revolted, and overthrew the feudal government. Then the Church of England was established by law and supported by public taxes. Very soon (1704), additional penal laws were enacted against the Catholics, whose priests were forbidden to hold mass or exercise any spiritual function, except in private houses. These restrictions continued until the Revolutionary War. Maryland presents the only case known in history of a country founded by Catholics for Catholics, giving entire religious liberty to all comers, who, when they became the majority, took their sweet revenge by turning against their fellow religionists the weapons of intolerance. Other Southern colonies were now organized. North Carolina was settled mainly through the Virginia colonists, who went thither, introduced their own usages and laws, and established the Church of England as the faith of the colony. South Carolina also received colonial settlers from Virginia. It began to be a colonial field about 1670. Its laws were at first very liberal, all faiths being protected with equal favor. But in time the Church of England gained greatest strength, and became the established ecclesiastical system. Georgia was colonized by the humane Oglethorpe in 1732. He brought thither a colony consisting mostly of English debtors. At this time one of the most badly treated of all classes in England was the debtors. The mere inability to pay a debt was the ground of the grossest inhumanity. These people were invited to join Oglethorpe, and they became the basis of the future population of Georgia. Persecuted Protestants from Austria settled later in Georgia. Jews were welcomed. In Oglethorpe's colony were John and Charles Wesley, who came as missionaries to the Indians. Wesley's mission in Georgia was a failure. His extremely high church notions and his enforcement of the canons of his church produced a most virulent opposition, which compelled him to leave the colony. The first colonists in Pennsylvania were Swedes, Dutch, and English. But the first charter for a regular colony was granted to William Penn by Charles II. In 1681. Though Penn was a Quaker, and his faith prevailed among the people whom he led to Pennsylvania, all communions were granted full liberty. The restrictions on individual liberty were in the direction of morals rather than of faith, balls, theatres, masquerades, cock and bull fights being prohibited. Penn visited Germany, and large numbers of Germans accepted his invitation and settled in the new colony. Penn's just and humane attitude towards the Indians made them the friends of his colony. He bought of them the land where Philadelphia now stands. They promised, "We will live in love with William Penn and his children, and with his children's children, as long as the moon and sun endure." The Quakers, who were persecuted everywhere else in America except Rhode Island, came to Pennsylvania. It was the refuge for all the persecuted along the Atlantic coast. The Scotch-Irish became an important factor in the new Protestant colonization. It is probable that the Scotch stood next to the English in determining the religious quality of the great body of American colonists. Charles II., when he became king, forgot the service which the Scotch had done for his succession to the English throne, and immediately began to persecute them. They were Presbyterians, and in sympathy with the Puritans. That was enough for Charles II., who, being a Stuart, was not bound by a sense of honor or obligation. He abolished Presbyterianism in Scotland, and established the Court of High Commission. Persecution of all the Presbyterians in Scotland and the north of Ireland became the order of the day. They saw that their only hope lay in hastening to America. They fled the country in large numbers during the reigns of both Charles II. And James II. They went to no particular colony, but only where they had an opportunity to exercise their rights of conscience. Some went to Maine, but the larger number went to East New Jersey and Pennsylvania. They went westward in Pennsylvania along the Susquehanna Valley, entered the Cumberland Valley, and continued into Virginia, North Carolina, and Kentucky. This element has been one of the most useful and influential in our national life, as it has always stood for education, morality, liberty, and progress. Other colonists arrived from various parts of Europe. The Moravians, under the guidance of Zinzendorf, came to Pennsylvania, organized societies in Philadelphia, and made Bethlehem, in Pennsylvania, the center of their work. Moravians also settled in Connecticut, North Carolina, and, to a limited extent, also in Georgia. The Salzburger Protestants, driven out of Austria because of their faith, were granted land and all civil and religious rights by Oglethorpe in Georgia, where they aided largely in the development of that colony. Protestant Poles joined in the colonial current to America. Italian Protestants came over and settled in New York, where the people of the Reformed Church extended hospitality to them and took collections in the churches for their relief. End of chapter 5.